evening and welcome to the regular meeting of the Kernersville Board of Aldermen. We're glad you are all here to join us this evening. Today is Tuesday, June 6th, and we have an exciting agenda, including a budget public hearing and several other public hearings tonight. We'll begin this evening with an invocation by Reverend Victoria Reed. Please stand and join me.
Creator and Redeemer, we come before you this evening with open hearts and minds and invite you into this place to allow us to pause and to listen and to receive before we reply. May the words and the actions be guided with peace and positive support for one another, even from differing opinions. And we ask that you continue to look over those within our community for the first responders. For our teachers and students as they prepare for summer break, we ask for their patience in the coming days and for their parents as well. And may you continue to allow those who serve this community to keep the community first and above all else. We ask this in your presence and in your name. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. All right, we have several items on tonight that are denoted as public hearings. When an item is a public hearing, persons attending shall be permitted to address the Board of Aldermen regarding the item under consideration. Those speaking in favor speaking first, and those against speaking second. Proponents and opponents shall each be given 20 minutes of time to speak, and may choose to allow one speaker to utilize that time or choose to allocate the time among different speakers. In the event that either proponents or opponents have not designated a speaker or speakers to represent that view, the mayor shall divide the 20 minutes by the number of speakers wishing to address the board, and each such speaker shall be allowed that given time within which to express his or her comments, ideas, concerns, expressions, and desires. After the opponents speak, the mayor will allow the proponents 5 minutes for rebuttal. If the proponents choose to exercise this option, the opponents will also have 5 minutes for rebuttal. In the event that the proponents do not present a rebuttal, then the opponents shall be given no further time to speak. And I'd ask as you come to the microphone to speak to also give your address, and it can be a business address. All right, item 1A is a public hearing rezoning Jason Grubbs, agent for Grayson Klein Properties, LLC, for property on Berry Garden Road, zoning docket K626A1. Ms. Garner?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It is my understanding that the applicant wishes to continue this request tonight. Is that still the case?
Good evening, Jason Grubbs, I'm the attorney for Culture and Grubbs, the attorneys for the petitioner, 109 East Mountain Street, Suite C, Kernersville, 27284. That is correct. Ms. Garner's understanding is correct. My client is in the process of sort of evaluating some of the conditions for the rezoning and how to best meet those, and if we could ask the board to continue this to the July agenda, or whichever agenda fits best with your schedule, that would be greatly appreciated.
Mr. Groves, we could move it to or continue it to the last week of June or the last week of July, Wednesday.
The last week of July would work better. I'm actually going to be out of town the last week of June. So,
Mr. Hooker, could you give us the date of that meeting?
That'll be July 26th.
All right, do I have a motion to continue this case to July 26th?
so
Got a motion by Alderman Thompson, second by Alderman Gorham. All those in favor, raise your right hand. It's unanimous.
thank you.
Thank you. See you in July, Jason. All right, the next item is item B. It's a public hearing on the budget. I'll recognize our town manager, Mr. Swisher.
Madam Mayor and Board, you have received a copy of the proposed budget for 23-24. We had the budget work session last week, so I will briefly cover some of the highlights of the budget for the public hearing that we're required to have, and then we will open that up for any public comments. So our budget, the proposed budget for fiscal year 23-24, $47,200,757. That's up from last year's budget. We have quite a few more capital projects that you'll see in the budget here in a minute as compared to last year. The good thing, we're recommending moving the tax rate where it is. It's currently at 55.9 cents per $100 valuation, and that's where we are recommending moving the tax rate for fiscal year 23-24. 1 cent at this tax rate, 1 cent generates about $400,000 in revenue for the town. We have here a comparison of last fiscal year, 22-23 versus this fiscal year. You can see our tax base increased a little bit, not tremendous, but not as much as we saw last year, but it did increase. Our tax base is now a little over $4 billion. It's $4,186,111,000. Forsyth County, of course, makes up the largest part of that tax base. We do have a very small portion of the town of Kernersville, the town limits inside Guilford County, that mainly starts around FedEx and goes a little bit to the east all the way past Amazon, and also on the other side of Southern Parkway, some of that property as well is in Guilford County. So I'll cover some of the expense recommendations, starting with the salaries and benefits. We have a few recommended changes that we think will enhance the salaries and benefits for our employees. One of the biggest of those is we are recommending increasing the starting wage for our full-time employees from $15 an hour to $17 an hour. And for our part-time employees, we're recommending going from $13 an hour to $15 an hour. To go from 15 to 17 for next fiscal year, I think that's about an $11,000 expense. Most of our employees are currently already at $17 an hour. We have probably 6 or 7 newer employees that we just hired that would see that bump from 15 to 17. Seasonal employees that are currently 13, they would go up to 15, and that would go across the board for all the employees. That would be about $32,000 expense. The main thing we're recommending this for is, number one, the folks around us, the municipalities around us. Some of those that went to 17, most of them are at 15, 50 to 16. They're recommending a cost of living increase or a merit increase this year. We are not, but we're offsetting that with going up to $17 an hour. Also makes it a little bit easier to fill some of the positions. We are still having difficulty. I think that was one of the topics last year during the budget, was the difficulty in filling some of those positions, some of the entry-level positions. At $15 an hour, we're still seeing that, probably more so this year than in years past. And definitely with the seasonal part-time positions at $13 an hour, we're having a tough time. I mean, realistically, you can go to just about any fast food restaurant, you know, Starbucks, Panera, those folks, they'll pay you $15 an hour. It's a lot easier work than what we're asking some of these folks to do for $13 an hour. So we feel that raising the seasonals from 13 to 15 will help offset some of that, and 15 to 17 for the full-time as well. We are recommending an increase in our 401k. We currently contribute 2% to the 401k for employees. We're recommending increasing that by 2%, bringing it to a total of a 4% contribution. That puts us in line, maybe 1% or 2% behind some of the larger municipalities around us, but it gets us a little bit closer than what we have been. We've not increased this since 2017. It was 1%. In 2016, we raised it by 1% in 2017, and so it has stayed there for the last 6 years. We're also recommending continuing our pay study that gives our folks developmental pay, which helps bring them closer to the market rate. This year, as you can see, the departments in the pay study, all of the department heads, admin, finance, HR, community development, Public Services, Parks and Rec, and IT. Last year it was Police Department, year before that it was Fire Department. So it's what this does is it moves the pay grade. Accordingly, we benchmark against other municipalities, against some of the private sector as well for certain jobs. We get a midpoint. The object of the developmental pay is to get someone from minimum to midpoint within 5 years. Some of them takes less time because they're already closer. But this helps our folks stay competitive with the market with other municipalities. We try to keep it about 98 to 100% of market. This, we've been doing the pay study, as I've said in the budget message, since 1998. It's helped us stay competitive. It's helped us retain employees, attract employees. And I also said in the budget message that you can't really eliminate it 1 year, because if you do, that's unfair to the employees that you're eliminating it for, and then the other departments still get the pay grade adjustment. So if we eliminate it, which we're not recommending, but if we did, it would need to be a 3-year cycle of elimination. The other thing that we're recommending under salaries and benefits is expand the hours of our wellness center to 5 days. It's currently 4 days, I think 4 or 5 hours a day. We're recommending expanding it to 5 days with the nurse practitioner and the nurse both there. When we opened this up, we thought this would probably be something we recommended in about 2 years, 3 years. It's been tremendous response to the wellness center on the side of the employees. It's seen a lot of use. It's helping us save some money on our insurance cost, so we can expand it for minimal cost and get that in return on our savings from insurance. The other thing under salaries and benefits, we're recommending some new positions. Not a lot of change as far as expense goes because of the way we're swapping it out. We're recommending 2 full-time park maintenance workers. We will recommend, if these 2 full-time employees are hired, we will eliminate 4 of the seasonal employees. So we'll swap 4 seasonals for 2 full-time. It just works better. It's easier from a scheduling standpoint. You know, the seasonals, they may work 1,000 hours, so they may come in March and they're out of here in October, November. They may come in a little bit later and stay later, but it's easier to schedule them if they're full-time and we know we have them here. So we'll eliminate 4 of the seasonals and hire 2 of the full-time. We're recommending a full-time custodian in public services. We currently have a custodian in public services, but it's through a contract position. So we can eliminate it, hire it here, and do it for the same cost, if not a little bit less, and probably get a little bit better product. The bad part about contracting it out is it's not a consistent person in there every day. So, you know, if we go to it and we do it full-time through the town, then we have that position consistent. And we're also recommending a full-time facilities maintenance technician starting in January of 2024. That position would primarily be assigned to all of the fire stations. Currently, they contract out a lot of the work. If the guys there can't do it, they contract it out. So we would offset some of the costs of this maintenance technician. Some of this position would be offset by a decrease in contracted services. I told you at the budget work session that last year was primarily, we gave a cost of living increase of 6%, and that was about it. We didn't do a whole lot else in the budget. This year, as you've seen, we're not recommending a cost of living increase. We've got the 401k increase, we have the minimum wage increase, and we have the pay study. And the pay study, like I say, that'll kind of get folks up 3 or 4 pay grades. So they'll still be getting a market adjustment, but it won't be a cost of living or merit. So we've kind of flipped this year. We're recommending picking up some of that equipment that we didn't replace last year. So we have right much equipment in the budget this year that we're recommending. All of this, with the exception of 1 vehicle, is replacement equipment. What that means is that equipment's already in the fleet, it's already in the department, but it's time to replace it. So all of this equipment, with the exception of the truck, there's 1 truck in Parks and Rec, is replacement equipment in some shape or form. So in IT, we've got some computers, some servers. The PD, we've got some patrol vehicle replacements. We got the radio replacements, some in-car computers, and some in-car cameras. With the radios and the in-car cameras, they have a life basically of, 5 or 7 or 8 or 10 years, it just depends on which one it is, that they're serviced by the manufacturer. And once they reach that time frame, they're no longer serviced by the manufacturer. So we're coming up on the radios and the in-car cameras. We replaced the body cameras last year. The in-car cameras will be run on the same platform as the body cameras. It'll be the Axon in-car cameras and Axon body cameras. So Parks and Recreation, one of the items we have there, you see we got some more on another page, is an additional swing set at 4th of July Park. A couple of years ago, we changed up the swing set down there, so we lost some available swings. Been a lot of discussion about putting some more swing sets out there, so we've got that in the budget this year. It's not under an installment purchase, and all of this equipment, I'll explain that real quick, all of this equipment and all of the capital projects, probably 99% of them are done on an installment purchase. We finance it over a 5-year period, 10-year period if it's capital improvement. The swing sets aren't, because there's so many different moving parts. Everything that makes up the cost of swing sets are the cheapest part of it. You've got the grading, you've got the tree removal, you've got the surface below the swing sets and all of that. So those will be paid for, they won't be financed. The other equipment in Parks and Rec that we're recommending, the new maintenance crew truck, that's the only new piece of equipment. If we hire the 2 new people, that'll be for those folks. Then we've got a service truck replacement, crew cab truck replacement, and a mowing trailer as well. Public Services, the street department, they have a skid steer replacement, and in stormwater for Public Services, they have a staff vehicle that's being recommended. Fire Rescue, got right much equipment there. We got some staff vehicle replacement, some mower replacement for Station 43, portable radio replacements, same thing as we have with the police department. They're getting near that end of their serviceable life. Thermal imaging camera replacement, those are used in fires. They detect heat. So if someone's inside a burning building, the thermal imaging camera will pick up their body heat and will let you can locate that person in the building based on that thermal image. Got the Beeson's Fire Station furnishings. You all are familiar with the Beeson's Fire Station. We're renovating that station and we'll occupy that. We've got to furnish it, the new part of it. Squad 41, that vehicle is 1998, 1999, we're recommending replacing that vehicle. We will eventually, the plan is to have a full-time rescue team that will use that vehicle until such time the folks that use Ladder 41 will probably use it. This will allow us to take off most of the equipment that we put on Ladder 41 that shouldn't be on Ladder 41. Really, we'll take it off and put it on this rescue squad truck. And then we have a bay door replacement at Station 43, 2 bay doors, I believe, there that we're recommending for replacement. Public Services and Streets. Last year we started resurfacing. I think we did $1.5 million. In this fiscal year, we're recommending $1 million in resurfacing this year. And all of these projects listed are really infrastructure projects more so than equipment. In General Services, that's the department or the division in Public Services that handles all of the town hall properties. We're recommending the first one is a roof replacement here at Town Hall. This roof is the original roof that was on the building. You can look around you in some places, right around here, all the brown spots. That's where it's leaking. We've patched it through the years about as much as we can patch it. The roof has, or the ceiling has fallen in some places, and we've had to go back in and replace it. So it's pretty much time to repair the roof or replace the roof so that we don't have those issues. We're also recommending the roof replacement on some equipment sheds down at Public Services. Fuel island replacement. The fuel island, that's just what it says. It's got the gas tanks there. It's the pumps that we use for all of the equipment. It fuels up down at Public Services. That's the pumps. And then structural repairs at the Kernersville Museum. We have a figure in the budget for that. Don't know for sure exactly where we're going to go with that yet, but we went ahead and put the estimated amount in the budget, and then, if it comes in less than that and we have to do less than that, then of course we will. Parks and Recreation, We've got some repairs to the walking path at 4th of July Park. I'm sure you all are familiar with that. That path is a little over 3/4 of a mile around the park. It's washed out pretty bad in some places along the side of it. We're recommending putting concrete curbing along the side of it, and then in the places where it's popped up really bad with tree roots, we'll go in and make those repairs. We also have some nonprofit funding, and I'll explain it a little bit more. I explained it briefly at the budget work session. In years past, is what we've done is, under governing body, all of these nonprofits were listed with the amount of requested funding or recommended funding. This year, under governing body, that is not the case. The way it's broken down is it just has a line item, says nonprofit funding, economic development. It has a dollar amount. It doesn't have each individual nonprofit. Two reasons for that. Both of them are changes in kind of the general statute of how it works. If any of you as an elected official sit on the board of a nonprofit, you can't vote to fund that nonprofit. So it's what could happen is, realistically, we could have 3 of you, 2 of you, or all 5 of you that are sitting on the board of a nonprofit. If it's broken out by each individual nonprofit in the budget, you wouldn't be able to vote on the budget with that nonprofit listed. So it's what we did was we just put a dollar amount recommended funding for the nonprofit in there. That way all of you can vote on the budget. You won't have to recuse yourself. We won't have to draft 5 different budget ordinances so that each of you are not voting on the nonprofit. And then at some point in time, probably by the end of June, you'll come back and vote on the funding for each individual nonprofit. So if you want to increase or decrease a nonprofit, you wouldn't really do it at this vote on the budget. With the budget ordinance, you would do it when we come in and vote on each individual nonprofit. We now have to have a contract with each of those nonprofits. So it's what you will be voting on at some point in the future will be, Kernersville Little Theater, $8,000. Do we want to fund them $8,000? If so, yes. If not, what do you want to fund them? If you increase that funding, we'll do a budget amendment at some point and pick it up there. But for the budget and the budget ordinance, you're just voting on that one line item, that $1 amount, and then we'll bring it back. So it's twofold. The reason you have to is, number one, you can't vote anymore. If you're on the board of a nonprofit, you're an elected official, you can't vote to fund them. Number two, we need to give them all contracts, stipulates what they will and won't do for that funding. We'll make the contract pretty generic so that we don't have to have really 20 different contracts. The biggest change will be the amount of funding, and then we'll bring those back to you. You have in here is the exhibit that's in the back of the budget, message that shows the nonprofits that requested funding, shows what was approved in 22-23, what they requested for 23-24, and what we're recommending for 23-24. Some of them went up, a couple of them went up. I think Senior Services has requested $5,000 more. Salvation Army, Kernersville Cares for Kids, Kernersville Museum, they are not being recommended for any funding this year. Crisis Control will stay the same. Crossroads Playhouse is a new one. They requested $2,000 for this year. Sister Cities staying the same, parts the same. Chamber of Commerce, in this particular one, out of the general fund, we've got 2 different funds that they get funded out of. They requested $31,250 and being recommended at $31,250. So this is all of the funding for the nonprofits from the general fund. We also fund 4 nonprofits, 5 nonprofits out of the occupancy tax. It's specific how that funding has to occur, what they have to use it for. It's mainly to be used for tourism-related activities. Kernersville Little League requested $3,000. They'll receive the same. The Botanical Garden, they received $25,000 last year. You can see it's rolled into Parks and Rec for this year. Kerner's Folly requested $50,000, and I think that still stays at $50,000. The chamber requested $24,500. being recommended for 14.5. The reduction is due to the fact that they're no longer funding the fireworks or the concert. The town had to pick up the funding for that. And it's about $10,000. So, and then Parks and Rec, that will be a transfer, and as I explained to the board, the way that works, we'll fund everybody that's requested money from the occupancy tax fund. We will fund all those organizations first. And then if we have $162,000 left, which we anticipate we will, we'll transfer that over to Parks and Recreation, mainly for Ivy Redmond Park and also to the Botanical Garden. This chart shows the tax rate of surrounding municipalities. I usually show this because you all hear, I'm sure, and I hear that Kernersville's got the highest tax rate of anybody around. Well, I guess it depends on who anybody around is. We're certainly higher than Walkertown, higher than Rural Hall, King. Those folks don't provide the same services that we provide. Of the municipalities that provide police, fire, Parks and Rec, public services, planning, those folks that provide all of those services, you have them listed here. Those are the ones that are closest to us. You can see we're lower by almost 4 cents than the next one, which is Burlington. This is based, their tax rates, based on their tax rate, it's from fiscal year 22-23, not 21-22, but it's 22-23. They haven't posted yet what they're anticipating. Some of them haven't, what they're recommending for this fiscal year, but I have a feeling that we'll probably still be one of the lowest, if not the lowest, at 55.9. So to wrap it up, you know, I usually like to point out some future concerns that we have. The biggest of those that we always have is the ability of our revenues to grow as much as the expenses increase. I mean, it's just like everything in everybody's everyday life. It costs you more to do everything. It costs us more to do everything. It costs us more to operate as a town. We've been fortunate that we've seen our revenues keep pace, and in most cases, our revenues have outpaced our expenses, which is what we like to see. I will tell you that next year in the budget, we will have the full payment for the Parks and Rec Center. Right now, it's in the capital project ordinance for this and for that particular project. Next year, it will roll over into the general fund. When we did that, you know, we anticipated that we could probably get a year or two of the payment without having to take it out of the general fund. That is, this year's the last year of doing that, so that will roll over into the general fund next year as a payment. It's about $1.4 million. So that will, if we have our standard growth in our tax base and our standard growth in our sales and use tax, that will eat up all of that $1.4 million. So next year might be a little bit tight unless we have some growth that we're not really projecting. So we'll just, you know, we'll have to wait and see how that comes out, but we know it's coming and we know kind of what to expect. So we see that coming down the road. So that's always a concern. It would be a concern even if we didn't have that payment for the Parks and Rec building rolling over. Still going to be a concern. The second one is the percentage of fund balance. That is our internal policy. What we require as our policy, our percentage of fund balance compared to our expenses. It has been 20%. The board did lower that. A couple months ago, they lowered it down some. We still have a concern of whether or not we'll be able to hit that percentage, not because our fund balance is decreasing. We still have the same amount dollar-wise in the fund balance. But you know, when you're looking at 20% of 35 million versus 20% of 47 million, it's a big difference in there. So, you know, we're not appropriating, we're not recommending any fund balance appropriation for fiscal year 23-24. So that's always a good way to start, a lot better than starting out recommending $1 million from the fund balance. So, you know, if everything goes well, we'll still be able to hit that and keep our percentage where it's at. But, you know, as our expenses go up, which they're going to continue to do, at least incrementally, you know, a little bit every year, the amount we have to have in there is going to increase, and that becomes more difficult as well to have that in there. So that's two that we'll be watching over, you know, the next fiscal year. And I think that that's all I have. Be glad to answer any questions that the board might have or any that the public may have.
Thank you, Mr. Swisher. Thank you for your hard work on the budget and the work of the department heads. Today is the public hearing on the budget. I'll declare the public hearing open. Is there anyone here who'd like to speak in favor of the budget or any of the items in the budget? Seeing none, is there anyone here to speak in opposition to any of the items in the budget or to the budget? Seeing none, I'll declare the public hearing closed. Do the aldermen have any questions of the town manager? Or any comments?
I do. Mr. Swisher, I had voiced concerns last year about the town of Kernersville budgeting and spending money on Apple products because, of course, they're made in China, and China's role in suppressing freedom in their country and in Brazil. We discussed it earlier. Have we taken any steps in that direction?
The computer replacements we have budgeted for are not Apple. We've heard what you said. We're trying to stay away from buying Apple products unless we have to for compatibility purposes. Some of the software programs that we currently run, the only compatibility is Apple, but most of our replacement computers are the ThinkPad, Lenovo's, and things like that. So, you know, we have, the way we have that budgeted is we have in there computer replacements, a dollar amount for that. It's not specific to a certain type computer. And so it's what we do is when we get ready to replace those, in 90% of the cases, we'll go through and look and see what the available options are and then go from there. So we have heard what you said there, and if at all possible, we will buy products that are not Apple related if they can do the same job and whatnot.
Good deal, I appreciate that. I know we're just one little town, but where we spend the taxpayers' money is important, and I appreciate you taking care of that concern. Thank you.
And, you know, like I say, the biggest issue where we can is for compatibility purposes, but like, you know, my desktop, I can use just about whatever. So, you know, we replace that with something that's not Apple if at all possible.
Good deal, thank you. That's all I have, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
And Madam Mayor, I forgot to say,
Go ahead.
the board certainly doesn't have to vote on the budget or adopt it tonight. The budget ordinance is an attachment. So I know last year y'all adopted it the same night as the public hearing. If you choose to do that, I think you have the budget ordinance in front of you. You can adopt that tonight, and then we will bring back, try to by the end of June, 1st of July, the contracts and everything for the nonprofits. You don't have to adopt it tonight. We just have to have it adopted by the end of June. We're required by law to have it adopted by
We do have
July
it.
1.
And
Yes,
we
ma'am,
also
you have it.
Digital.
And it's also loaded onto the agenda as an attachment. But you don't have to adopt it tonight if you don't want to, and if you've got some more questions or something, that's fine. I'll be glad to answer those at any point.
Do you have any questions or comments?
No, I don't know about the rest of the board, but I don't have any problems on voting on that tonight.
I have one comment about the budget, and does not impact our voting on it tonight. I understand from the questions asked at the workshop that there is a fund balance available in the occupancy tax funds designated for travel and tourism. I think the Chamber of Commerce does a lot of advertising that brings people into our community for special events like the Spring Folly and the Christmas parade. A lot of the things they do are big draw, including job fairs and healthy active adults day and things like that. So I think that we ought to fund the additional $10,000 requested, that they would use it for advertising, promoting events in the town and bring tourists to our community.
Yes,
So-
ma'am, you're correct. There is a fund balance in that account. And like I say, I hope to have all those contracts by June, certainly by July. And if the board, at that time, that would be the time to say, hey, we would like to fund them the additional $10,000 from 14 back to 24. And we could, if it's in the occupancy tax, which is where the reduction was, we could certainly fund it back to that, and all that would be required at that point would just be to do a budget amendment for that particular fund. So you wouldn't do it tonight anyway in the budget. You would do it when that contract comes up and that goes for any nonprofit. If there's, another nonprofit that's the recommended fundings in there and the board says, hey, I want to fund them more or I want to fund them less. Or if we get a nonprofit that for some reason says, I don't want any funding this year because I can't meet the obligations of the contract, we may not have to do a budget amendment because it would all be in that one fund. So if the board adopts a budget tonight as it's laid out with the budget ordinance, it's not going to mean that they're going to receive $10,000 less funding. We would clean that up when it comes up with the contract at some point in June or July.
I think that's fine, and I think especially in light of the Chamber of Commerce starting a new community event in the fall, the Veterans Parade, the Sunday before Veterans Day, that this board wholeheartedly supported. I think having that additional funding for them would be helpful.
And it wouldn't be any problem, and I think I mentioned it to the board, and I mentioned it tonight. With occupancy taxes, what we do is the last transfer that we make is over to Parks and Recreation. So if the board gives them $10,000 extra from the occupancy tax, at the end of the, when we get ready to do all the transfers, if we don't, for some reason, don't have it in there, they've already received their money, all the other agencies have. It's just, $5,000 or $10,000 less we transfer to Parks and Rec and we pick it up in the general fund. So it wouldn't, it's not going to be a big issue to do it. We do have a fund balance in there. I think right now we're anticipating it being around about $100,000. Some of that may go toward the museum, the structural renovations there. I think that would be an allowed use for that. But I think we'll have enough in it to fund them, for sure.
Okay, thank you. I do want to comment, as you see from the budget and from the presentation, the budget covers everything from very large projects, $1 million for road surfacing and repair, to extensive equipment for our public safety departments, our fire rescue department, our police department, and necessary maintenance like the town hall roof. So a really comprehensive budget, but also includes some of the things that make it a little nicer to live in Kernersville, like the swing set that has been requested by our citizens who use 4th of July Park. So from very large to smaller projects, but all that benefit the community. You've done a really good job putting this budget together, Mr. Swisher, and I appreciate the efforts of all the town departments to work together to use tax dollars very wisely, but in a way that benefits the citizens, the community, and our infrastructure and our public safety. So thank you for your hard work on this. Is the board prepared to vote on this tonight, or do you need more time to study it?
I would like to make a motion that we accept the budget as presented.
Okay, got a motion by Alderman J.R. Gorham.
Second.
Got a second by Alderman Thompson. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you. I think with that long presentation and the other things we've had, I understand you may have a request for continuance. All right, we'll handle that and then we'll take a brief recess. So the next item is a public hearing on annexation by Weldon Residential Holdings, A5 2023. Before you come up, Mr. Swisher, do we need to take separate action on the schedule of fees or anything like that, or are we done with the budget?
I think they're all included in the budget. We don't need a separate action on schedule of fees, do we, Franz? Okay.
Okay,
yeah,
so
it's part of the, yep, you're good.
Okay. All right, so this is a public hearing. Ms. Garner, my understanding is you had said they were going to request a continuance.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Mr. Rhodes, would you like to be heard?
Good evening, Mill Rhodes, 1715 Weldon Village Avenue, Kernersville. Yes, I would like to request a continuance for tonight's public hearing on annexation so we can run concurrently with the planning board review next week.
Okay, and then do you have a specific meeting you'd like it continued to?
I'll go whenever you tell me.
Mr. Swisher, do we need to continue it to a specific date?
I think we talked about the June. And the last meeting in June, which is what, Keith?
June 28th.
June 28th.
That works for me.
Okay, do I have a motion to continue?
Madam
this?
Mayor, just a quick point. Since you did have Milt Rhodes come up to speak, and since it is going to the very next regular meeting, if you open the public hearing, as you kind of did with Milt coming up to speak, then no further advertisement of this one would be needed, because it would be going to the next regular meeting. So my suggestion would be to technically declare the public hearing open, since you had Milt come up to speak, and then vote to postpone the public hearing to June 28th.
Mr. Powell, does that suit you?
I think that'll be fine, Mayor.
All right. I will open the public hearing. Thank you for coming to speak. And I'd like a motion to continue this public hearing.
So moved.
Got a motion to continue?
Second.
All those in favor? It's unanimous. Mr. Hooker, do you need anything further?
No, ma'am, that was perfect. Thank you.
Okay. And we will take a brief recess. Welcome back to the regular meeting of the Kernersville Board of Aldermen. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing, a rezoning. Michael Thalen, agent for West Mountain LLC owner, requesting a single-phase conditional use rezoning amendment from GIC to GIC, General Industrial Conditional Use District, for properties located at 900 West Mountain Street, containing a total of 14.41 plus or minus acres, and being all the pins listed in the agenda, zoning docket K799A1. And we'll have a consideration of an ordinance rezoning said property. This is a public hearing, but we'll begin with a presentation by our Community Development Department, and I'll recognize Ms. Garner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This case is an amendment to the case we heard last year at the same site. So last year we rezoned the site to general industrial with a conditional use specific site plan, and the request this year is also for general industrial conditional use with a new specific site plan. It is still in the highway corridor overlay and the industrial corridor overlay over West Bodenhammer and West Mountain Streets respectively. So all the uses that are shown in the agenda were the previously approved uses with K799 last year. And at the time of the initial application, the applicant was thinking, well, maybe we want to go with all of these uses, and then later through the process determined that no, manufacturing A was the use that they want to pursue. So it's only the single use to be considered tonight, manufacturing A, which is described as an establishment engaged in the fabrication or assembly of products from pre-structured materials or components whose operations, including storage of materials, processing, fabrication, or assembly of products, and loading and unloading of new materials and finished products occurs completely within an enclosed building. Because of the nature of its operations and products, manufacturing A produces little or no noise, odor, vibration, glare, and/or air and water pollution, and therefore has minimal impact on surrounding properties. So this is the new site plan that's being proposed. Bodenhammer Street is here on the right, and West Mountain Street is at the bottom. The building is proposed to be constructed in 2 phases, with an office portion on Bodenhammer Street and one large section of the warehouse in phase 1, and then phase 2 would be an expansion of the warehouse and then the parking lot as well. This is a comparison with the site plan that you approved last year, showing 3 buildings on 4 parcels. The 4th parcel was for the little stormwater pond, but 3 buildings, multi-tenant buildings on each parcel. And then this is 1 parcel under 1 ownership with 1 building constructed in phases. The applicant is requesting a departure from the strict application of the highway corridor and industrial corridor overlay districts as permitted in UDO section 2-1.6. F3B that allows for the alderman to consider an alternate proposal to the strict application of the ordinance as part of a conditional overlay request. So there are 2 portions of the building, a front office and the rear manufacturing portion. This would be the front office elevation, which does kind of have a more futuristic look to it than the strict highway corridor overlay application. And then this is a bird's eye view of rendering of what the rest of the building would look like with the first phase 1 of the manufacturing portion here. And then this would be the office portion, and you can see it in plan view here as well with loading docks to the middle. And you see those in this area on the 3D rendering. KDP 59 of 2022 amended the land use plan from mixed use to industrial, which is defined as areas established for manufacturing, distribution, office, and business service provider uses. The areas provide locations for businesses and office parks, and the majority of industrial boundaries follow roads and streams to assist in buffering industrial uses from adjacent properties. So the manufacturing A use and the GIC zoning district proposed are consistent to the current land use plan as it was amended last year. And this shows the site here in gray. This is the land use plan as part of the Kernersville development plan. Everything in gray is also depicted as industrial. The park across the street, and then some residential on the other side of West Mountain, and then further up on Bodenhammer as well. Planning Board and staff's recommendation is to amend the Unified Development Ordinance of the town by rezoning the property in case K799A1 from general industrial conditional to general industrial conditional, finding that the rezoning is consistent with the comprehensive plan and being both reasonable and in the public interest, because the conditional use district rezoning allows the site-specific plan to be considered. The petitioner's plan promotes economic development, and the site is located at the edge of an industrial corridor within an existing commercial business immediately adjacent. Planning board and staff also recommend approval of the site plan and the conditions as presented in the planning board report. And this was the vote at the May planning board meeting of members present. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Ms. Garner. This is a public hearing, and I have several people signed up to speak. I want to remind everyone that we do have a 20-minute time limit for each side, no matter how many speakers are on that side. Mr. Thalen, you've come with several other people. How long do you need to speak?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and members of the board.
Right now, I just want to find out the timeframes.
I would expect 8 minutes for Mr. Hill, about 10 minutes for Mr. Gavick, and then about a minute each for me and for Ms. Lee from Winston-Salem.
Okay, and in what order?
In that exact order right there. Mr. Hill to Mr. Gavick, to me, and then to Ms. Lee. I'm sorry, to Ms. Lee and then to me.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Just leave it at 20 and just count it down. You can do it. Oh, so she's the mayor.
All right, and I have one person signed up in opposition, Mr. Lane. Where are you? Okay. All right, is there anyone else who'd like to speak on this public hearing? If so, I'd request you fill out a speaker card there in the back of the room so we can make sure we allocate the time properly. Okay, this is a public hearing. I'll declare the public hearing open. Our first speaker is Mr. Alan Hill.
Yes. Good evening. My name is Alan Hill. I'm Principal Civil Engineer with Triad Design Group located at 4807C Coker Boulevard over in Greensboro. I'd like to thank the board for this opportunity tonight to speak. We are here to present in support and request this board's approval of a single-phase conditional rezoning of this 14-acre parcel, which, if approved, would remain general industrial conditional, though the use profile would limit only to manufacturing A, and there would be a new site plan. During our presentation, you will hear from Jim Gavick with Flat Architects, Mike Thalen with Womble Bond Dickinson, and we also have Brian Christie here from Deere. He's here to respond to any questions. As we heard in the staff report, the property was rezoned in May 2022 from light industrial, general industrial conditional to general industrial conditional. So this parcel has been zoned industrial since 2009. As you can see from the slide, there's a long list of allowable uses as the property is currently zoned, including manufacturing A, which is allowed throughout the property as currently zoned. The currently applicable site plan includes subdivision into 3 parcels, 3 buildings, 2 access points on West Mountain Street, and 1 access point on West Bodenhammer. Per the staff report, the conditional district rezoning process is ideal for development of this tract as it gives the town the opportunity to carefully review uses, site layout, and building design and consider impacts to adjacent properties. This is a conditional zoning, and the slide depicts the uses that will occur on the property if the rezoning is approved, which is manufacturing A use as defined by the town's laws. More specifically, the use will be a co-branded venture between John Deere and Chrysler Electric, the latter which is now majority owner majority owned by John Deere. This photograph you see here is a slide or a photo of Chrysler Electric's headquarters in Austria. This is not the proposed look of our building. So, okay. Okay, this slide that you saw earlier depicts our overall site plan. Some of the design challenges that we were faced with are the irregular shape of the site, the railroad right-of-way to the north, the size of the site, and the topography of the site, as the site falls in elevation from north to south. Triad Design Group and Flat Architects spent a significant amount of effort over time to find a site design that would achieve the business goals of the project while mitigating as much as possible any impacts to surrounding properties, and in particular to the residential property on the south side of West Mountain Street. A lot of time was spent trying to find a way to orient the truck bay area on the north side or opposite the opposite side of the building away from the residential areas. However, such reorientation efforts only pushed the employee parking and the building much closer to West Mountain Street and within direct sight of the residential properties. It also diminished the ability for the sizable vegetative buffer that is now offered along West Mountain Street and risked the placement of a sidewalk along West Mountain Street toward West Bodenhammer Street and 4th of July Park. After significant time and effort to address and balance as best as possible the interests of the project and the neighboring properties, this design reflects the least impactful design to achieve the highest and best use of the property in light of the size, shape, and topography of the parcel, and with special consideration for the surrounding properties. In other words, we understand and have worked very hard internally and with the staff to reach this fair and balanced design. Unlike the previously approved plan, we have removed the two accesses from West Mountain Street and the cul-de-sac. Eliminating the two accesses on West Mountain Street serves three important functions in terms of mitigating impacts to the residences on West Mountain. First, it keeps car and truck ingress and egress from occurring directly to and from West Mountain across from the residential properties. It allows for uninterrupted sidewalk connection along West Mountain and safer pedestrian connectivity. And it allows more sizable uninterrupted vegetated buffer along West Mountain Street. On page 6 of the staff report, it states that the removal of the previously proposed access road in favor of existing access points decreases the potential for traffic conflicts on the town's major thoroughfares, as the previously approved site plan was for multiple buildings with multiple tenant spaces. The revisions to a single tenant space within one building will further lessen the amount of traffic. I mentioned sidewalks earlier. Our plan proposes sidewalks for the entire frontage of both West Mountain Street and West Bodenhammer. We've also addressed stormwater. Our proposed stormwater retention devices are in essentially the same location as under the previously approved site plan. They will meet all applicable laws in terms of design and operation. These systems will ensure that any stormwater is properly treated and controlled, and that there will not be adverse stormwater impacts to any of the surrounding properties. This is an enlarged shot of the west side of the site. Things I want to point out here very quickly are the truck access off of the private road. You notice there are no access points on West Mountain. We anticipate approximately 8 trucks a day. So it's very low truck volume, much lower than you would have with a warehousing or distribution. This is an enlarged shot of the east side, and just pointing out a couple of things here, we are showing 2 access points onto West Bodenhammer, and the sidewalk across the frontage of West Bodenhammer, and more importantly, the perimeter security fence that we have will be opaque in the area of the docks and the refuge containers and rolling containers to serve as a screen for those areas.
Mr. Hill, you're at time.
Turn it over to Jim Gavitt at this time.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jim Gavick. I'm a project manager for this project with Flad Architects. I'm located in our Madison, Wisconsin office. We also have staff from our Raleigh, North Carolina office on the project. I'm at 644 Science Drive, Madison, Wisconsin, 53711. You can go to the next slide, Catherine. So we were engaged last fall by the Deere Kreisel team to evaluate this site along with Alan's group at Triad. And there were really 4 benchmark items that we were given by Deere that we wanted to address on the project in terms of their goals. Item 1 was the size of the facility. To meet their building business plan, we're looking at a 250,000 square foot assembly manufacturing space with ancillary office space attached. Item 2 is that office space, and there was a desire from the design of the project to reflect with the design of the project what was going on inside the building in terms of the high-tech nature. This is battery pack assembly for electrification of vehicles and construction equipment, and they wanted the building to reflect the nature of that business. The other 2 items were, as Alan mentioned, the sensitivity to the neighboring properties across Mountain Street, as well as really wanting to embrace the natural features of the 4th of July Park across the street from Bodenhammer. So on the next slide, so this is the overall landscape plan that was part of your package. Kind of highlighted some of the things and colored some of the areas that we wanted to address, showing some of the existing vegetation near 4th of July Park, as well as across the street in the residential area. There's existing mature vegetation along those streets. Our landscaping design, as Alan had mentioned, in terms of how we laid out the building, we really pushed the building to the north, allowing us to maximize the buffer space on the south edge of the property and giving us as much vegetation as far in terms of a buffer between the residential properties. The other design element, we really, this site is sort of an introductory site. The slide that Catherine showed with the industrial properties further to the west, we really wanted to embrace the corner of this site as an entrance from the downtown area to that industrial site. And rather than driving past 4th of July Park, we really wanted to, as we designed the building and the landscaping, to sort of make it feel like you were driving through 4th of July Park as you go down Bodenhammer Street. So some of the renderings, the first rendering on the next slide, Catherine, is from that corner. Looking down Bodenhammer Street, this would be from 4th of July Park, looking at the front of the building. You can see the large canopy and visitor entry on that corner of the property, and then the additional landscaping across from 4th of July Park. As you get down to the corner of Mountain Street, and this image is looking west on Mountain Street, you can see the existing gas station on the lower right-hand corner. There's actually significant mature vegetation behind the gas station, which we diminished a little bit in this image because we wanted to be able to see the building. But actually from this view, much of the building is obscured by that existing vegetation. And then as you progress down Mountain Street on the next slide, Catherine, This is at the corner of North Park and West Mountain. The entrance off to the right is actually the entrance going back into the residential properties. You can see as you look to the east down Mountain Street, the building is pushed back as far to the north as we can get it and elevated above Mountain Street so that we could maximize the vegetation along there and really try to lessen the impact on the neighboring properties. So the next image just shows the entrance to the building and how we tied that landscaping in with the architecture, which goes into the next section. On the next slide, we did want to address, sorry, one more forward. The highway corridor district overlay, as was mentioned earlier, we are applying for a deviation from the building materials that are specified in the building standards for the highway district overlay. And there are 7 purposes stated in that UDO section. And we feel that the images that we will show for the proposed elevations of the building meet or exceed those intended purposes of the highway district overlay. On the next image is showing the materials that we're proposing. The taller building in the background is the large assembly building. That would be a decorative concrete tilt-up panel that has cast reveals in it. And then the front office building is a combination of aluminum curtain wall, pre-finished metal panels, as well as solar fins that I'll talk about a little bit later. So on the next image just shows a little bit closer up view, and I wanted to give some photograph images of what some of those materials look like. We wanted to reiterate that the metal panels are a painted panel. They're not a highly reflective metal panel. And the entry canopy has an exposed structure. And then the 2 images on the right show the decorative concrete panels that we're proposing to use. The ribs in the image, the 3rd image here on the right, tie in with some of the metal panels on the front office building. If we go to the next slide. The image on the left is the solar fins that I mentioned earlier. And you can see those on the front of the building. They actually provide a nice architectural element to the building and also serve a function of providing shading inside this building, which faces predominantly south and east. We also have glass curtain wall systems and then a ribbed metal panel, which, like I mentioned earlier, kind of ties the front office building into the rear tilt-up concrete panel portion of the building. So the next images are just some blow-ups of some of the areas on the building, and we can just kind of scroll through those. This is at the front entry of the building. This one shows the solar fins and the metal panels that are proposed on the front. And then the final image is a little bit more of an elevated view from 4th of July Park. Again, just showing the kind of the aesthetics. You know, the intent of the design was to sort of feel like our building is benefiting from the beauty of 4th of July Park, but we also wanted the building to be something that people enjoying 4th of July Park could view almost as somewhat sculptural in nature, and really add to the, you know, to the experience of the citizens using the park. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Mike. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gavin.
Thank you, members of the board, Madam Mayor. It's Mike Thielen, again, 1604 Jarvis Street in Raleigh with Womblebon Dickinson. You can go to the next slide, Catherine. You heard this earlier, so I'll be very quick, but I'll get into a little more detail with regard to the town's land use plans and the specific small area plans that apply here. You heard both Alan and Jim talk about the sensitivity to the surrounding neighbors, including to our residential neighbors, but there's also sensitivity to the town's land use planning and land use thinking. You heard Catherine talk earlier. This slide just shows how the property is currently treated with regard to the land use plan as amended last year. In particular, I'll draw your attention to this sort of a sloppy highlighting to the wide range of assembling note there for the general industrial district under the town's land use plan. That's essentially what is happening here. There's no manufacturing in the chemical sense. It's simply the assembly of smaller batteries into larger battery packs, so it fits squarely within the narrative. To the next slide, please, Catherine. Thank you. This is actually the most interesting of all. This is actually the small area plan called the West Mountain Street Industrial Area Plan, which is talked about in your land use plan. In particular, you'll see the site with the blue arrow on the bottom right there. We're on the southeastern edge of the small area plan. I found this really interesting. That last bullet at the bottom talks about economic development, but that narrative, I think, is pretty insightful and certainly applicable here, as this is a Deere project and it's a further investment of the future of Deere and in the future of Kernersville, that too often communities focus on attracting new businesses instead of promoting those already existing. The notion there being not just bringing new businesses in, but incentivizing and getting excited about the expansion of existing businesses. I see that a lot with what I do. The new guys get a lot of the attention, and the guys who are already here tend to get a little less excitement. So I thought that was a pretty interesting to highlight here from your land use plan, and we appreciate that note. The next slide, please, Catherine. Then again, very quickly, there's our property with the blue line. You'll see that both West Mountain and West Bodenhammer are major thoroughfares, so we're building on what are major thoroughfares. Again, the traffic impact is expected to be somewhat slight, as was noted earlier, and certainly not of the intensity of a manufacturing and distribution facility of a larger scale or warehousing and distribution, but it is nonetheless very suited for these roadways that we are entering and exiting to. To the next slide, please, Catherine. And lastly, I know sidewalks, and in particular, the connectivity of the park all the way to the YMCA is a big interest for the town, understandably so. And you can see here again, the blue line highlighting where we are, that we are extending the sidewalks where they are planned to locate under the town's land use plan. And with that, I will thank the board, and I will turn it over to Ms. Lee with Winston-Salem Inc. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
And Ms. Lee, you can move the microphone if you'd like to.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't need to do that. Good evening, Madam Mayor and Aldermen. I'm Laura Lee, representing Greater Winston-Salem Inc. At 525 Vine Street, Winston-Salem, 27101. I'm truly honored to speak in support of this exciting opportunity for future-focused growth in Kernersville. Greater Winston-Salem Inc. believes this rezoning really does signal the importance of Kernersville to the legacy of this company that's been growing in our community over time. And we really do see this as also demonstrating tremendous potential for quality investment for this expansion project, along with other growth opportunity in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are out of time now for proponents. So now I will recognize opponents. I have Mr. Bryce Lane signed up to speak.
How you doing? Bryce Lane, 727 West Mountain Street, here in Kernersville. I'm not quite as organized. I don't have an attorney on payroll. But I want to point out one thing, as Ms. Garner mentioned, this was rezoned last year, but it was, according to the minutes and the meeting that I remember, it was rezoned from mixed use to general industrial. And maybe I'm confused on something, but the last year's rezoning seems a little bit of a straw man rezoning. I don't think it was ever intended, in hindsight, and what some things I've learned in the last few weeks, that I don't think the intent of last year's rezoning was ever actually planned. I think it was the intent of John Deere all along to take from step A to step B, which was last year, to step C, which is this. You know, it seemed like smaller steps instead of one big step, and I think it really needs to be considered from the original plan, the mixed use to this. To quote some of the things from the meeting, from the planning board meeting last year, the recommendations, it says, the applicant has proposed to tailor the uses for each of the 3 proposed sites to improve compatibility with surrounding uses. It has been established to promote redevelopment of downtown and the Bodenheimer Street area. I don't know how that promotes downtown or anything. Lists a whole bunch of neighborhoods, Caleb's Creek and things, saying area to develop more of a traditional village-style development pattern, which it does not do that. Along with that, it was requested the conditional use rezoning last year to allow a specific site plan to be considered. And then said the petitioner's plan will promote economic development by providing flexible space for multiple tenants within each building. So all of the recommendations from the planning board last year on why to approve it are different reasons than this. And I think it really needs to be considered from the step 1 to step C, or step A to step C, not B to C. I think it's a little bit of a circumventing of the rules of the town and how to go about these things. I am opposed to it. They talk about at the planning board meeting, they talked about an 8-foot opaque fence along West Mountain Street. And then they also mentioned I believe it was a 30-foot grade up to where the building is. An 8-foot fence is not going to shield anything from the dumpsters and the loading docks or anything like that. It's just going to be more sound. Ms. Mayor, you mentioned earlier about how the budget meeting is to help, the community, and I don't see how this does anything to help the community and the residents around it other than providing the town more tax dollars. So that's really all I have. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, is there anyone else here to speak in opposition? Would you like to present a rebuttal, or you don't have to, it's optional?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right. All right, since there's no rebuttal, there's no counter rebuttal, so I'll declare the public hearing closed. Is there any questions or discussion by the board? Just a clarification from the agenda to the staff report. So the list of uses on the agenda, it's not the full use that they're requesting now, just the manufacturing A.
That's correct. They've reduced the request from everything listed in the agenda to just manufacturing A.
Okay, so it can no longer, it can no longer be a arts and crafts studio, brewery, brew pub?
Correct.
Okay.
Any changes beyond manufacturing A would require a new rezoning with new consideration.
Okay.
I have a random question, Catherine, just pertaining to the old plan. On the old plan, it being 3 separate buildings, and I don't remember because it's been a year, but how many loading docks were on each, were total with these 3 buildings?
I don't remember off the top of my head, and I think it was going to depend on the ultimate layout of each, because they were proposing it as shell buildings with the tenant upfits. So it could have changed as the building was developed.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to state, I understand, I respect Bryce's, Mr. Lane's opinion on this, especially living across the street from it. But I think my opinion would be that the use that they're trying to change this to is a much better product with less traffic I mean, you got 3 different buildings on one site that are with 2 different entrances coming off I guess one off Bodenheimer and one off West Mountain, that to me is a whole lot more intrusive than what the petitioner is bringing in today, especially with 8 trucks. I think you said 8 trucks a day. And I can only imagine with one business being able to regulate everything that goes on this corner at one building is going to be a whole lot better for everyone around it, instead of having 3 different buildings and who knows how many different tenants that not one person's going to be able to control them all at one time. I would think it would be more self-contained with one building, one owner, one entrance that's not even off the main road other than the offices on Bodenheimer. That's just my opinion.
I've got a question. With respect to the loading docks, how do you shield that from Mountain Street?
If
Whoever's-
one representative could come up and answer that question, and just that question.
The architect fella. I believe you're gonna have like 8 docks with the first phase there. That's kind of behind the service station. How are you shielding that from the people that live on West Mountain?
Yeah, so there's kind of a tiered approach right now to the plans for providing the visual screening to the loading docks. And that's, like I had mentioned earlier, that we're really trying to get as far away from West Mountain as we can. And we started with that, and that really gave us the opportunity to provide a landscape buffer. And the highway corridor overlay requires that the landscape buffer have a berm, so we've got sure. Yeah, so Mike's got some handouts here that.
So here are the schematics that may help in paper form that we just don't have as part of PowerPoint. Is a general reference.
Yeah, so as some of the renderings that we had showed earlier kind of indicate that, we're really wanting to get the building and the loading docks as far away from those residential properties as possible. And that's, that's why we push them as far to the east so that they would be primarily behind the service station. And, if you drive through that area, there's significant mature growth behind the service station now.
If you could hold on for just a moment
Sure.
so we can shuffle these papers first.
Yep.
Could you give Mr. Lane a copy? Could you give Mr. Lane a copy of these? It's just 3. And there's 3 total, correct?
There are 3, yes.
Okay.
The anticipated 8 trucks a day, is that during the daytime, the nighttime, or 24 hours a day? Could you speak to that?
I'll let Brian speak to that as a representative here.
Good evening, Brian Christie with John Deere, 1000 John Deere Road, Kernersville. The answer to the question is it'd be more or less normal business hours. So we would start with 1 shift and grow to 2, but we wouldn't expect truck traffic to happen across both shifts. It's possible it could come into early evening, but other than that, there wouldn't be anything beyond that. It's also, I'd like to remind you, internal unloading. So we've got a dock seal and we do all the loading and unloading within the facility and the truck itself.
Right.
And then
Excuse me, could I get your name, could I get the spelling of your name for the record?
Yeah, my name is Brian Christie, Bryanchristy.
Do you need him to repeat that, Keith?
No, thank you, I've got it.
Okay. And then could you re-answer the question about the view that Mr. Barrow, the first question?
Yes.
Okay. About what you would see from the loading docks and this fence and that sort of thing? Now that we have these images, like what are we looking at?
Yeah, so the three handouts that Mike gave you, I guess the first one that I'm looking at is an overall view of the building, a plan view that shows trees around the perimeter. So if you look on West Mountain Street, just to give some perspective, at the corner of North Park Drive and West Mountain, from that corner, from the center of that intersection to the center of the loading dock turnaround area is just over 750 feet. And then as you get closer to the service station, it's about 350 feet from West Mountain in front of the service station to the center of the docks. And that's where that heavily treed existing vegetation is, behind the service station there. So, you know, a lot of the view sheds that we were trying to add new screening for was kind of beyond that, the intersection of the service station property and our property and moving to the west. And that's where we have, kind of starting with the street, we've got the new sidewalk, we've got a highway district corridor, a street yard buffer, which has a 3-foot berm and is heavily vegetated along that area. And then our landscaping will continue all the way up to that roadway where the truck access comes in. There's a stormwater retention pond directly south of the dock, which has approximately an 8-foot high retaining wall on the backside of that. So it's kind of a tiered approach. We've got a berm, vegetative buffer, we've got the retaining wall from the pond, and then kind of up about 15 feet above Mountain Street is the actual landing area of the docks. And along the edge of that is where the security fence is for the property. So we're kind of looking at, like I say, multiple elements for providing that screening.
Do you have any follow-up questions to that?
What?
Do you have any follow-up questions to that?
Well, no, my concern was, I had spoken to Mr. Lane, you know, about this, and his concern was the trucks, the hours, possible problem with the noise. This particular business, it'll be John Deere, correct?
It's a joint venture between John Deere and Kreisel Electric.
Okay, I know that John Deere, they've been excellent to work with in the past in terms of neighbors and noises and all of that type of thing. We'd be dealing with the same people, same corporate idea, I suppose, to get along with all their neighbors. Mr. Christie, maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the joint venture that Mr. Gavick spoke to is majority owned by John Deere, and we would be expanding that business into the U.S. Under John Deere principles, along with the Kreisel product line. So,
right, and y'all give the number to Mr. Lane, right? So if he has a problem, he can call, right?
Absolutely.
Good deal.
Will this be the first? Well, it's not relevant to the zoning case, so I guess I won't ask it. Never mind. I have a question for after this.
Okay.
All right, any other questions by the board? Any other comments?
I've got one more question. You were going to explain a solar fin. What exactly is a solar fin?
So the solar fins are, they're a vertical fin that projects out roughly 8 inches, 2 inches wide by 8 inches deep, and they're spaced, well, the spacing can vary. We do a solar study on the front of the building the sun passing across throughout the day. And what they do is they provide shading when you've got a lot of windows on the front of your building. We want to provide, again, we want to accentuate that view out the front of the building, but we don't want to be baking in the sun all day. So those fins are actually outboard of the skin of the building by roughly a foot. And as the sun passes through the day, it provides shading inside of the building. But it also provides a very unique architectural element to the building.
So the fins are fixed in place, they don't move?
They are fixed, correct.
Okay. All right, any other questions? All right, do I have a motion?
I move that we amend the Uniform Development Ordinance of the town by rezoning the property in case K799A1 from GLC to GLC. That the said rezoning being consistent with the town comprehensive plan of Kernersville development plan. Is that enough, or do I need to read the whole thing?
In accordance with the recommendation of staff.
Yes, in accordance with the recommendation of staff.
Does that work?
Okay.
So this is a motion to amend the UDO by rezoning the property in case K799A1 from general industrial conditional to general industrial conditional, the said rezoning being consistent with the town's comprehensive plan, Kernersville development plan, and further being both reasonable and in the public interest because of following facts. The petitioner requested conditional use district rezoning to allow a specific site plan to be considered to ameliorate impacts to adjoining properties and mitigate traffic impacts. The petitioner's plan will promote economic development by providing expansion space. The site is located at the edge of an industrial corridor with an existing commercial business immediately adjacent. Is that your motion?
Nicely said, yes.
Okay, I've got a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Thompson. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. The motion's approved unanimously. And so I'll ask my question. Is this the first location of Kreisel in the United States?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. And when do you expect to get started?
We're working through some business angles, but within a couple of years is probably a pretty good target. It takes some time to design the processes we need to put into the building to produce the battery packs at the quality level that we expect. So that's one of the lead time.
I appreciate in your design that the first phase is as far away from as many houses as possible, and only the second phase gets into more of the residential areas. Thank you for your presentation, and best wishes.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Is there anything else we need to do on this zoning case? Okay, we will move on then. Our next public hearing is a text amendment. Curtis Swisher, agent for the town of Kernersville, for a proposed zoning text amendment to the UDO amending Chapter A, Article 2, definitions, Chapter B, Article 2, permitted uses, Table 2.6, Chapter B, Article 2, use conditions, Section 2-5.36 through 2-5.37, Chapter B, Article 3, Section 3-3.2, Table 3.8, off-street parking requirements, and Chapter B, Article 5, non-conforming uses for the purpose of establishing internet electronic gaming establishments as a primary use with applied conditions, zoning docket KT 274, and consideration of an ordinance adopting said text amendment. This is a public hearing, but we'll begin with a staff presentation. Ms. Garner?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This text amendment touches on several portions of the UDO, as you've referenced, and the purpose is to establish internet and electronic gaming establishments as a primary use with applied conditions. The use of sweepstakes gaming is currently regulated under the definition of nightclub in our UDO and is subject to the use conditions of 2-5.51. And as the trend of the use continues to rise, the primary use of internet and electronic gaming establishments is being proposed to provide clarity in specific use conditions. You can imagine that when folks call and they're looking to open a business and they say that they want to do this, and we say, well, we regulate you as a nightclub. They go, but I'm not a nightclub. So it is intended to provide clarity to the use and establish specific conditions for this particular use. The UDO's zoning districts were considered as part of this application of where would this use be appropriate and applicable. And so staff is recommending that this use be permitted in the highway business zoning district. The purpose of the highway business district is intended to accommodate retail service and distributive uses, and it is established to provide locations for establishments which require high visibility and good road access, or which cater primarily to passing motorists. We've found and we've heard from business owners that they like a lot of visibility for their business. It attracts patrons. And so highway business felt like an applicable zoning district with the intent for it to be in high visibility areas. We are also proposing specific use conditions for the use. Many of our uses actually have specific uses that cater, or specific conditions that cater to those uses. So the following are proposed with this text amendment. So no internet and electronic gaming establishment shall be located within 500 feet in any direction from any religious institution, public or private child care center or facility, public or private school or municipal government facilities, including but not limited to municipal public parks. This one's very consistent with what nightclub already requires. The measurement shall be made in a straight line without regard to the intervening structures or objects from the nearest portion of the building or structure used as the part of the premises where the internet and electronic business is conducted, or to the nearest property line of the premise of which the use is located, whichever is closest. Again, this is consistent with the way the nightclub has been used and applied in this case. It's just bringing it over to tell people this is how we're going to measure it. And so everybody is understanding of how it's going to be applied. We're also proposing rules of operation. These were reviewed by Planning Board twice. This was originally taken to Planning Board in April, and they tabled, there was a lot of discussion, and they tabled the vote on the matter until the May meeting because they wanted to see some changes and some additional research. So these are the rules of operation as revised, and then revised again by Planning Board at the May meeting. So number one, during hours of operation, internet and electronic gaming operations shall be open for direct, unobstructed access by police, fire, and emergency response personnel. Number two, all entrance doors shall remain unlocked while the premises are being occupied by patrons or an approved Knox box for emergency access. Number three, all internet and electronic gaming terminals, computers, tables, machines, and gaming stations shall be open and visible from the exterior front of the establishment. Number four, a maximum of 40% of windows and glass doors are allowed to be tinted, covered, or obscured, with 60% of the glass area remaining transparent. Number five, no person or entity engaged in internet and electronic gaming operations shall allow, permit, or condone any person under the age of 18 to be upon the premises while patrons are engaged in the gaming operations. Number six, all rules of the internet and electronic gaming shall be displayed in a visible and prominent place within the establishment. And number seven, all internet and electronic gaming establishments shall be required to comply with all local and state laws. You can see that there's a common theme through these rules of operations, which is safety, both for patrons and for first responders who may be approaching the scene after an emergency call. We want to make sure that everybody is able to access the site, which is the number two, that the doors have to be unlocked or a Knox box has to be available for first responders to enter. And then that everything needs to be visible so that people who are responding can see what is going on when they approach the site. When you establish a new use in the UDO, you've got to define what parking it requires. So it will be requiring one space per 150 square feet of gross floor area. This is consistent with similar uses in our UDO and also with regulations established by other municipalities. And then also you have to tell folks how we will deal with non-conforming situations. So things are slightly shifted and codes are changed, but it will be addressed in the non-conforming situations. So this would also apply to new businesses that are open. Those that are already open are grandfathered under the existing rules as a nightclub. So this would be if it were adopted, any business opened after adoption would have to comply with these rules. Staff and Planning Board's recommendation is approval of the text amendment as amended from the original staff report. The rules of operation that we went over tonight are as Planning Board revised them at their May meeting. I will be happy to answer any questions that you have, or Mr. Berenger, who's the Community Development Manager and was primary staff liaison on this project.
Okay, this is a public hearing. I'll declare the public hearing open. Is there anyone here to speak in favor of this proposed revision? Seeing none, is there anyone here to speak in opposition? Seeing none, I'll declare the public hearing closed. Any questions?
I got a question, Madam Mayor. I was reading the paper last week and I saw where the legislature was considering a sports book all across the state. Would that not be kind of the same deal, or are we gonna, are we doing something here and then a month later we're gonna have to have something new? And if you looked at that, that's my question.
I think they've had multiple iterations of that bill in the House, and whether or not they're going to consider sweepstakes, you don't know until it's at the final vote. If we are preempted by the state, then we will respond accordingly. But in the meantime, this is what we've proposed.
Okay.
And Mr. Barry, in all likelihood, even if the state allows it, which there's some speculation they may allow these internet gambling places, I think the changes as Ms. Garner and Ms. Barringer recommended will kind of not restrict those, but it'll kind of help define where how they'll operate and where they'll be located, as opposed to just located anywhere, pretty much anywhere under the current UDO. We'll kind of help guide them into some different places and have some rules of operation for them that we currently don't have. So, kind of in anticipation of them allowing it, this will kind of help if they do allow it.
Okay. The pictures, you included pictures in your presentation here of 6 different sweepstakes. Of these 6, would any of those run foul of your new rules and regulations?
Yes, sir.
They'd be grandfathered, but.
Yes, sir. The ones that are still open legally would be grandfathered in. So they would still be subject to the rules and conditions of a nightclub. But some of them would be in violation of the current proposal if they fell under that purview. Primarily locking the doors and completely screening out windows. So that's 2 of the primary things that we've seen. Right. But we would not be able to enforce. Now, several of these have since closed. Some are still trying to open. We're working with them on what can or cannot be considered. But if they reopen under a new use and occupancy and they had been closed and outside of the window of their previous existing, then it would fall under these rules.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for Chief Tilley. You can come up to the microphone. Chief, do you have any concerns about the percentage of the windows and doors that could be covered versus the percentage that needs to be open, or do you think that that's adequate for emergency purposes?
Well, to be honest, for us, the least amount of tent, the better. I would prefer to see a little bit less coverage of tent, just to be totally honest with you, because these places are a problem for us. They really are.
Okay, thank you. Chief Aldermen? It's reasonable to think you may get a call to respond for either fire or a medical emergency at one of the locations. Do you have any safety concerns with the proposal as it currently stands?
We do not, as long as there is a requirement that there's a Knox box be installed so we can gain access, then that's adequate for us.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Gardner, what are the requirements for like a retail business? Like, is this too much ability to screen the windows and doors compared to other places in town? Should it be a lesser? What would be reasonable for the board to consider here? I know the planning board worked really hard on this, but they started at, with just trying to create something new that we didn't have. There's just not been a lot of definition. Places like this, kind of like you said, opened up as nightclubs. Prior to that, they opened as office centers. That, it's really changed over the years and evolved the use. And there have been a lot of calls for emergency services at these places for various reasons. So I just want to make sure we're hitting the right balance, but, building on what the planning board's good work was to consider as a final ordinance.
If, Madam Mayor, if you don't mind, I'll respond to that question. The original proposal was for full transparency, no tinting whatsoever, and in an effort to, in deliberation with the planning board, as well as doing research of public safety standards through different protocols, the Department of Public Safety. So natural surveillance is primary to safety. But planning board's concern was that we were being a bit too restrictive to say you can't tint your windows at all when other such retail or beauty salons or spas do have some window tinting. In this purview of this case is we're looking at the model, the business model of the operation, and feel that based upon some of the situations that have occurred in the past, it is imperative that there be a level of transparency to the operations for the public safety of our citizens as well as our emergency personnel. So the 40% of tinting and 60% threshold was kind of a negotiated that this may provide enough of the visibility to provide that safety, but also give the business owner the ability to have some screening.
Was it negotiated with business owners or with the?
It was with the planning board primarily. The discussion came back and forth, and that's when it was continued at the first hearing, and I researched and met with the police department personnel, discussed the previous cases, and then discussed their comfort level, and again, full transparency is always better, but the 40% and 60% transparency at least gave them visibility into the occupied spaces.
Okay, thank you.
I got a question for the chief. The chief, looking at the report here, it says that these internet gaming establishments comprise less than 1% of the town's businesses, yet resulted in 40% of the business-related robberies. Really?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. And Lieutenant Cruz from CID actually did another study as far as per capita of robberies where we compared to Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. And with our internet sweepstakes, we actually have a higher ratio of robberies per capita than Winston-Salem and Forsyth County.
Don't these things, doesn't everybody use credit cards in these things? I mean, I've never been in one, so.
They pay out cash.
They pay out cash?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That makes sense. Now, when you say 40%, how many actual robberies is that in a year?
I don't have that number on me, to be honest with you, but I can get it for you.
Okay, thank you.
While you have the microphone, Chief Tilley, do you have a sense of, it seems like if somebody wanted to put a sign in their window or maybe tint the bottom part of a glass door or something like that, that there might be a reasonable amount of tinting or covering, but do you have a sense of what would be better for responding to calls or preventing crime?
I think obviously the bottom would be better. I don't know exactly what the restrictions were as far as what they can tint or what they can't. Is there a restriction on actually the front or height or anything like that?
No, sir, it did not specify where they could tent, only that it still has to be visible from the exterior. So, that's where the interpretation of, if I walk up to the establishment, an average size human, I should be able to see into the establishment. I shouldn't have to crawl on a chair to see into the establishment. So how they determine which way they're going to tent, whether it's a little bit from the bottom or center or however, you have to be able to see from the exterior of the entrance or the property.
Okay, thank you.
I got a question. What's the tent for? I mean, I understand on hair salons or the way the store is facing, you might need a tent to shield in the afternoon when the sun's coming in and it gets hot, but what's the point of having a tent when most of these places are more crowded at nighttime anyway?
Do you want my opinion?
Sure.
I think it's to obviously prevent people from seeing in, just like they keep the doors locked, and I'm glad that was addressed, and they keep a security guard at the front, and they won't let anyone in unless that security guard lets them in. I think it's to hide possibly illegal activity and things of the sort.
I got a follow-up question. We was talking a while ago. You say these places pay out in cash, that'd be the reason they'd probably get robbed,
Yes,
correct?
sir. Yes, sir.
And I thought about that a minute. Banks in North Carolina, you can't put your money in the bank if you're one of these sweepstakes. Were you aware of that?
No, sir, I was not aware of that.
That banks don't want to do business with them because of the constantly, it's illegal, no, we changed the program, now it's legal, it's illegal. And banks have not wanted to have anything to do with them. Do you see that changing moving into the future? I mean, as you know, we're passing laws saying you can do this, and the state, they're obviously considering a sports book, so, I would think that would change the banking end of it, and that would probably take care of the whole robbery situation if there wasn't so much cash on hand.
Yes, if they're not paying out cash, that would definitely help the situation. As years and years have went on, they've always changed the law, and then there's been a loophole and another loophole and another loophole.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of people have lost their lives, and a lot of people have, good people have been victimized.
Right.
But if cash was not involved, I feel like it would help out a lot.
And I think they'll probably still pay out in cash. Is what'll change, I think, if North Carolina makes them legal, is the owner of the sweepstakes will then be able to do banking services like normal. But as far as the patron, me going in and winning, I think they'll probably still pay out in cash to the person that actually wins. They have, some of them have went in the past, and I don't know why they changed, but you used to go in and you would get something similar to a debit card, and you would get credits on that card, and then you wouldn't have the cash, but you could turn around and go back and take that card back and then cash it out. So I think even if they make them legal, I think you'll still be seeing payouts on the end of the patron that's playing the game. I think they'll still get paid out quite a bit in cash. That's one, supposedly if they win, I think it's $600 or more. Supposedly they get a 1099, but who knows?
Thank you.
I've got another question. Chief.
Go ahead.
How do we monitor this? Like, if the planning board was negotiating on what percentage to tent versus not to tent, I don't have the knowledge to be able to tell somebody what they can and can't tent. How do you run statistics on, okay, today let's say we decided to go with the tenting that's on this, what we're looking at now, and you've got your numbers on how many calls you've had in the last year or two. How do we change it moving down the road? What do we do? You see what I'm saying?
Can you repeat that one more time?
So if we make a decision right now, and I feel like I'm making a decision on something I know nothing about, but we're making a decision on less tent or more tent, but we're basing it on the numbers of the calls you've had, So in a year from now, we look back and go, well, we tented 60% of it. Where's our police calls now, and what's the difference? Are we going to then turn around and make another guess as to if this amount of tent or not tent is going to help the situation or not? I guess that's I'm kind of at a loss. I don't know that I can make a decision on this. I'm not even sure what it's going to help or not help. I can see where it would help by not tenting at all, because you can see in, but if they're locked, I mean, if you're not, I don't understand how you monitor, how you can have statistics on this, and we can make a decision later on based on what we're doing now.
I don't feel that the tent is going to prevent robberies. I feel like the tent is safety for us, knowing what we're getting into once we get there, for us and fire, all public safety. That's what my concern is our safety. I don't think the tent's going to prevent or stop the robberies. If that's what we're trying to accomplish here, I don't think we're going to accomplish that. As long as, like Alderman Barrow and Town Manager Kurtzwisher, as long as they're paying out cash, you can rest assured there's going to continue to be robberies. But I think the tent, and my point is, I'm worried about the safety of our officers.
That makes much more sense.
And Chief Tilley's correct. I mean, the level of tent was decided, as they said, the transparency of being able to see when our officers or when our firemen arrive to the scene, they can see inside. So I don't think, even if the number of robberies drops to zero, I don't think we would come back, staff would come back and say, hey, let's eliminate the tent, because it's not really to help prevent the robberies. It's what it is so that a safety issue, so that we can see inside. These folks can see inside when they get there. So the robberies could drop completely to zero, and I think that would still be there, that you can only tent so much of it so that our folks can have visibility inside.
It makes perfect sense. I understand that now. I got you. So that being said, if we're discussing where the tent should be, it sounds to me at eye level is where it should be opaque. You should be able to see right through it at eye level. The tent shouldn't be waist high and up. I mean, that would make more sense for safety purposes. But thank you for explaining that.
Can I get some clarity here, please? Is the intent of what we're trying to do here tonight is to establish something because we don't have anything in existence as of right now?
Yes.
And so since that seems to be the intent of what we're trying to do, this sounds like a beginning, that we can start with this and then a year or two from now evaluate it to see if it's effective, that the rules that we have proposed here tonight. But if we're in a situation right now that we have nothing to govern by or any kind of language or proposals, that I think we need to go ahead and vote on this so we can get something in place to help the situation, and then evaluate down the road to see if it's effective or make some changes or add something additional to it based on statistics as they come in.
And you're correct, Alderman Gorham. That's kind of what we would do with the text amendment. We do that with other text amendments that you've seen. We come in and recommend those, and it would be based on how that changes during the year. As Alderman Barrow pointed out, if something changes at the state level where they come in and they adopt something that pretty much overrides what this board's adopted, then we would go back. But you're correct. This is to get something on there so that we have something for these places that are coming in to open up. We have some parameters for them so that, they know how they can operate. We know how they're going to operate, and then we'll monitor it along the way. And if there's some things that we see, hey, this, there's no need in having this particular restriction on it, then by all means we can go back to the planning department, planning board, and board of aldermen and change that.
In consideration of Alderman Thompson's comment about the hair salons and spas, I think I do agree that no tinting would be better. I'm not sure why you would need tinting. So I would go back to the number 4 recommended by staff originally. Windows and doors must remain transparent with no obstructions. And I do agree with you, Alderman Gorham, it would be good to adopt something to start regulating this. It's almost like the use came in without a category to put it in, so it was placed in the closest thing possible. But I think it would be easier to go back and allow window tinting than to tell people who had already tinted the windows to untint them. So I would think for new establishments, it would be the better course of action to require the doors and windows to be transparent with no obstructions.
To add to what you're saying,
Go ahead.
what was the reasons from the beginning where you came up with that particular restriction in the first place? What was the criteria or the evidence or information that you used to make that type of decision or proposal?
To allow some tinting, is that the question? That was actually part of the recommendation of Planning Board, and that was the original proposal was for full transparency, excuse me, full transparency with no obstruction on the windows or doors. And they wanted to make sure, I guess, that we provided different options so it didn't appear that we were calling out only this business type. But staff's report did indicate that the recommendation was for no obstruction at all, full transparency of windows and doors.
And I think the mayor is correct. If you're looking at changing it down the road, it's easier to go back and add tint than it is to remove the tint. So you're correct in that if you start out with full transparency and then, as Alderman Gorn suggested, you come back and you revisit this at some point in the future, and you say, okay, yeah, we can tint it 40%, but we don't want to do it in the middle of the door, then it's easier to go back and add that tint than it would be to remove that tint at some point in the future.
I have a question. Before we pass this thing, or don't pass it, I hate for somebody to come up and go, you voted for that? So I got a question. This tint thing, we're just dealing with whatever windows and doors happen to be in the building that they're putting it in, right? So if, for example, they put it in a place like the bowling alley, which has just maybe one door or a couple of doors, no windows. What I'm saying is there's no requirement that there be so many windows, right?
That's correct. It's whatever windows and doors are pertinent to the internet and gaming establishment as a primary use. But I do want to just clarify one thing. It's not just about tinting. It's any obstruction over those windows, whether it be blinds, drapes, anything that obscures the transparency and visibility as you approach the establishment.
I understand, but my point is, if they put it in a building that didn't have any windows and had a wood door, well, then that'd be fine too, right?
So if they have no windows or even a door with a window, then there's nothing we could do about it. It just specifically states that the gaming terminals, computers, and tables still have to be open and visible from the exterior front of the establishment. So if the doors and if there are no doors and windows and the Knox box is there where emergency personnel can access the facility, they should be able to see all operations when they enter the premise.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any further questions or discussion? Is there a motion?
So can we make a motion with the rules as proposed with the exception of the rule dealing with the tenant section? I don't know how to go about doing that, but.
That's a really good question because that's not how it's presented to us. So I think, Ms. Behringer, would it be to make a motion for approval as originally recommended by staff?
I think that would be consistent. The report in your packet does have the original proposal of windows and doors must remain transparent with no objections. It also identifies the Knox box requirement for emergency access.
So moved.
Okay, got a motion by Alderman Gorham. Do I have a second? Second by Alderman Penix. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed? Keith, did you get the vote? 3-1.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And then just another note, the planning board does not have police presence there or there's no police officer there to answer questions necessarily. The first meeting that you had on this, I know there was a second meeting, but.
Correct, yeah. I don't think we had them there at the first meeting, but when there was additional questions and research needed, then we had police personnel at the meeting for the second one to answer questions.
And the town attorney's not there?
No.
And the fire department's typically not there?
The town attorney did review the presentation prior to moving forward to planning board, so I did consult with the town attorney.
So our meetings are a little different than the planning board meetings. We've got access to more information about the other town operations when we meet here than the planning board does. But we appreciate the hard work they do and carefully looking at and being inquisitive about potential legislation that we pass. All right, is there anything else on this case? All right. We will move on then to one more public hearing, right? Item F. All right, we've got a public hearing on a text amendment. Curtis Swisher, agent for the town of Kernersville, for proposed zoning text amendment to the UDO relating to setbacks in various zoning districts, zoning docket KT 275. Ms. Garner?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Our last case tonight is another text amendment. You may know that the Kernersville Unified Development Ordinance was adopted in 1993, and it has been tweaked and fine-tuned over the years, but it's not been wholesale rewritten. We would like to move towards that after a comprehensive plan following the traditional planning steps, but we've been trying to fix the things that are broken rather than doing a whole lot of cosmetic upgrades, but fix the things that are truly not working, such as the last case and then this one. So this is a proposal to modify setback standards in the mixed use and T&D zoning districts. The first changes are to specify that in sections 2-1.5 C and then D, which is on the next slide, C is for mixed use conditional zoning district, it would specify that these general dimensional requirements are for non-residential development. That's tripped up a lot of our engineers and developers because there's a footnote underneath this table that says for residential, go to this other table, but they see the big table and they assume that that's for them. So regardless of what they're proposing, we end up going, well, no, you've got to consult this other table. So we're clearly stating that this table is for non-residential development, and then the footnote refers you to where to go for residential. That's the same for subsection D of that same section, which is for traditional neighborhood development zoning districts, also adds non-residential development. There's another minor tweak on this because that table in the section 3 references that the minimum zoning lot in T&D can be 18 feet in width, but that hadn't been brought over to this section, so we're making sure that both the tables match each other. So that's just a correction. So Chapter B, Article 3, Section 3-1 has this big table, which is where the footnote refers you. So this lists the dimensional standards for residential uses in those certain non-residential zoning districts. So that includes the zoning districts that allow both commercial and residential. So the mixed use conditional dimensional standards are proposed with this table to match those of T&D conditional for the following areas: for minimum zoning lot in area and width, rear setback, and side setback. So when we looked at the mixed use district and the purpose statement and the T&D and the purpose statement, they're very similar. They have very similar ways that they are adopted and established, and they require the conditional zoning district, but T&D uses the traditional alley style design. So they're primarily entering the property or the house from the garage from the back, whereas mixed use is typically front loaded. So we left the front setbacks different for the two zoning districts for the difference in design. So that really just means that when a petitioner is considering which one do they want, when we're meeting with them as staff, we're going to say, okay, how do you want to design it? Because that's going to determine the way you're going to go. For the side and rear setbacks, there's intended to be flexible zoning districts to allow a variety of things, a mixture of things, traditional design, had a mixture of uses. So we're adding the ability for mixed use to have that flexibility, just like T&D already does, since the difference in the districts is mostly in how they're set up and designed. Dimensional standards have also been added for townhouse developments in mixed-use conditional. Previously, T&D was the only district that was allowed to have townhouses. And so there are townhouses in mixed use, and we sort of fudged it, and now we want to make it legitimate. So one of the good things about this chart and the way that it's proposed to change is that it doesn't create any nonconformities with the mixed-use lots that have been platted. So by making the numbers smaller, everything that's been established at these higher numbers remains conforming, which is good for those who are trying to then resell a home. Planning Board heard this at their May meeting, and they conferred with staff that this should be approved as presented in the staff report. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. I know there are a lot of little moving pieces on this one.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Garner. This is a public hearing. I'll declare the public hearing open. Is there anyone here to speak in favor of this proposal? Seeing none, is there anyone here to speak against this text amendment? Seeing none, I'll declare the public hearing closed. It's a lot of work to put together this proposed amendment. Thank you for your efforts. Is there any questions or discussion?
No, motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Alderman Thompson.
Second.
Second by Alderman Gorham. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. It's unanimous. All right, we are moving on to the public session. Item A is speakers from the floor. If you'd like to address the Board of Aldermen on a non-agenda item, this is your opportunity. Mr. Hooker, have we received any speakers cards for speakers from the floor tonight?
I have not.
Okay, thank you. All right, seeing none, I will move on then to item B, consideration of an ordinance allowing gates for temporary closures of Moravian Lane. Mr. Swisher.
Madam Mayor, this ordinance that you have before you kind of stemmed off of the discussion, I think, last month about closing Moravian Lane. And Alderman Barrow, I think, asked the question of the individual wanting to close it at the time, could you put up some temporary gates or barricades or whatnot? So, as you all are aware, it didn't pass to close Moravian Lane. So we've talked to the folks at the church, and they were receptive to the idea of either placing a gate that they would close upon notice to the town, or barricades that they would purchase and pull out and close. So you have in your packet the ordinance, and kind of what it says is that no person shall drive any vehicle into or upon a gated portion of Moravian Lane except as necessary for funeral processions or proceedings when properly gated by either the town of Kernersville or by a representative of Kernersville Moravian Church or successor to the church in name. Gates are to be placed at the boundary of the state-owned right-of-way along Cherry Street and at a point 100 feet from the state-owned right-of-way along Main Street. And said gates will be closed 1 hour prior to the starting time of the funeral service and open 1 hour after the end of the service. If gated by a representative of the church, the town clerk, and we'll recommend here adding Kernersville Police Department and Kernersville Fire Rescue Department, will be notified by a representative of Kernersville Moravian Church prior to the closing of the gates and at least 24 hours prior to the funeral service. Gates closed in this manner will not be in violation of Chapter 11. So it's what that says is if they know that they're going to have a funeral service and they need to close Moravian Lane for that, they'll notify the town clerk, they'll notify someone in the Kernersville Police Department, someone in Kernersville Fire Rescue, and then they will be allowed to close that gate without going through the normal process of blocking off a street that you all, generally you have to have 30 days or 90 days notice and whatnot. That's obviously will not work for a funeral. So this will allow them to do that. They were fine with this process and this ordinance. The board can adopt it, not adopt it, but if we adopt it and we see that it needs some tweaking somewhere down the road, we'll bring it back to the board for such.
All right, any questions or discussion? Is there a motion? To approve? Yeah, to approve. Okay, motion by Alderman Barrow to approve, second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Gorham. All those in favor? It's unanimous. All right, item C is consideration of a SITA request for property located at 900 West Mountain Street. Ms. Garner?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a requirement for an increase in the amount of impervious coverage that is allowed. It's reviewed by the Watershed Review Committee before it is placed on your agenda. So there was a recommendation from the Watershed Review Committee for adoption, finding that it was consistent with the scoring mechanism set up in the ordinance. We do recommend approval of the SITA for 70% impervious coverage for the 14 acres at 900 West Mountain Street.
All right, are there any questions or discussion? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Move approval by Alderman Gorham, second. Second by Alderman Thompson. All those in favor signify by raising your right hand. It's unanimous. Item D, consideration of an ordinance for Budget Amendment 10 for fiscal year 2022 to 2023. Mr. Swisher, is this the last one?
We might have one more.
Okay.
We'll be pushing it, but we might. This one and the last one are just cleaning up some of the expenses, moving around some money in different departments. You have in your budget amendment the expenditures that we're doing the amendment for. The largest one of those, number 6 there, is the engineering department expenditures in the net amount of $587,000, and that's to reflect the construction of the Medical Parkway sewer project. You have the offsetting revenue from that as well. Over on the back page there, you can see that in the revenues. Overall, when everything is washed out and everything is said and done, we're decreasing the amount of fund balance appropriated by $1.586 million. So the next, if we do another budget amendment, that will likely decrease fund balance appropriated by even more. That brings us to a total this year appropriation of $7.4 million. So be glad to answer any questions you might have about the specifics, but again, most of them are picking up some retirees insurance. We have some folks retiring at the end of the year, picking that up, picking up some travel, changes in travel and whatnot. Finance department, professional service, we had the banking council we use for the Beeson's Fire Station renovation, so forth, things like that. So most of them are pretty small, but it's things we have to clean up before the end of the year.
Any questions?
I got a question. Number 7, increase the street department expenditures $31,249 to reflect increases in street lighting cost. Does that mean you're going to get rid of all these purple street lights? Is that what that means?
No, that means we're probably actually going to put more of them in and still charge us more. We don't have any control over it. Duke puts them in, and you get purple where you get kind of light white, tan. It's a crapshoot, but they still charge us the same amount. The purple ones aren't any cheaper. If they were, we'd be all right because we have several of them around. But
yeah, the purple ones are very aggravating.
Yeah, we do call them and tell them that we'd like not to have purple lights, but again, it's Duke Energy, and they kind of tell us if you want a light, you'll have a purple one. Not a whole lot of bargaining room with Duke Energy.
All right, do I have a motion to approve? Motion by Alderman Thompson, second.
Second.
Second by Alderman Gorham. All those in favor, raise your right hand. It's unanimous. Moving on to item E, consideration of a contract for financial auditing services for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023.
This will be to get our audit done, as it says, for fiscal year ending June 30th of 2023. It is with Dixon Hughes Goodman. The board approved the 5-year contract with them, but you approve the 5-year contract, you're also required to approve every contract every year, which I'm not sure why you do one and have to do the other, but it's kind of the way it works. So this is for their services for fiscal year 22-23. They will be starting that probably in the next month or so, starting the audit and getting that wrapped up. So this is for those services. We've used Forvis I want to call them Dixon Hughes Goodman. It's now 4 of us. We've used them for probably the last 7 or 8 years at least. They do a really good job. They get it done on time, get it to the state most years on time. We've been pleased with the services, and so we're recommending continuing to use them for that.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Got a motion by Alderman Gorham, second.
Second.
Second by Alderman Thompson. All those in favor, raise your right hand. It's unanimous. All right, item 3 is the consent agenda, which tonight, on a very rare occurrence, is simply a placeholder. It would have been possible we may have amended the agenda at the beginning of the meeting and put something on the consent agenda, but we did not, so there's nothing to consider there. So we'll go down to item 5, Town Manager's Report.
Madam Mayor and Board, I have 2 short items. The first of those is the mutual aid agreement with Union Cross Fire Department. We received that today. I think you approved 3 of those at your meeting last week. So what this is an agreement that says they will provide aid on calls inside the town limits of Kernersville when we need them, and we will provide aid to them on their calls as well.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve? A motion by Alderman Barrow,
Second.
second by Alderman Gorham. All those in favor, raise your right hand. It's unanimous.
And the second item, the nominations committee has met and has interviewed some candidates for the different volunteer boards and commissions. You have a memo in your packet from Keith Hooker. Regarding those appointments, the nominations committee is recommending appointing Fentress Gerald as an in-town alternate member to the Board of Adjustment with a term beginning July 1, 2023, ending on June 30th of 2024. Appointment of Jeff Manter as an in-town alternate to the Board of Adjustment with term beginning July 1st, 2023 and ending on June 30th of 2025. Appointment of David Collins as an in-town regular member to the Board of Adjustment with a term beginning on July 1, 2023 and ending on June 30th of 2026. And then appointment of Eric McFarland to the Rec Advisory Board with the term beginning on July 1st, 2023 and ending on June 30th of 2026.
So we need a motion to approve the appointments.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, do I have a motion? Got a motion by Alderman Penix,
Second.
second by Alderman Gorham. All those in favor, raise your right hand. It's unanimous.
And I have nothing else, Madam Mayor.
And congratulations to the new appointees to those boards and commissions. We really enjoyed interviewing everybody we spoke to, and their level of engagement and interest in being involved in the town of Kernersville was absolutely wonderful. So look forward to their service. All right, is there anything to be presented by our attorney, Ed Powell?
We do have need for a short closed session.
Okay. All right. Do you all want to, do you have anything to present while everyone's here? Mr. Penix or? Okay, Mr. Gorham?
Just want to make everybody aware that, hey, we're having our Juneteenth on the 17th of June, and we would like a full show from our community to come out and celebrate with us from 10 to 2 at Harmons Park on Saturday, June 17th. That's next Saturday after next.
Thank you. Free t-shirts, the first 100 people.
Yeah, and they're nice.
Mr. Barrow?
I don't have anything.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
I do. I'd like to congratulate Chief Tilley. I was unable to be at the meeting last week and just want to tell him congratulations and look forward to working with you. Congratulations.
He dressed up real well too, I might add.
All right, it seems that we have a closed session. Mr. Gorham?
Madam Mayor, pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318.1183, I move that the board go into closed session to consult with an attorney employed or retained by the public body in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney
and the public body which privilege is hereby acknowledged.
Got a motion by Alderman Gorham, second. Second by Alderman Thompson. All those in favor, raise your right hand. It's unanimous. Thank you for joining us. This meeting is now in closed session. got a motion by J.R. Gorham to go into open session, second by Thompson. All right, we are now in open session, and we're going to wait till everyone gets seated and then go back. Mr. Powell, are you ready? You want to sit down for just a second?
Okay. Let's look municipal.
Welcome back to the regular meeting of the Kernersville Board of Aldermen. I would like to wish everybody a happy summer. Now that we've gotten to the start of summer, the groundbreaking for the Kernersville Recreation and Event Center again is Saturday with a concert in the evening at 5:30 and Juneteenth on the 17th. Hope to see you all there. Is there any further business before this board? Okay, if not, may I have a motion to adjourn? Motion by Alderman Thompson.
Second.
Second by Alderman Gorham. All those in favor? It's unanimous. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you for joining us.